The signal arrived at the Galactic Council's primary station on a quiet Tuesday morning in the outer reaches of the Andromeda sector. It was not a diplomatic greeting. It was not a request for protection or an application for membership. It was, quite simply, a warning that the Council members would never forget. Do not approach Earth. This is not a request. The message repeated across every known communication frequency, translated into 47 different languages, spoken in the voices of thousands of humans, layered over each other like a chorus of warning that seemed to echo through the very fabric of space itself. The Council's communication specialists replayed it again and again, searching for hidden meaning, for some indication that they had misunderstood what was being said. But the message was clear, direct, and unmistakably serious. Vextrel, the ancient council chairman, was the first to respond. His species had ruled the galaxy for over 3,000 years, and in all that time, he had never heard anything quite like it. The being's crystalline body caught the light as he moved through the council chamber, his movements deliberate and measured as he gestured to his advisors. Vextrel had seen empires rise and fall. He had witnessed the development of countless civilizations, from their first steps into space to their eventual membership in the Council. But this was something new, something unexpected, something that made even his ancient mind pause with curiosity. "What species is sending this?" he demanded, his voice like the sound of ice cracking across a frozen lake. One of his younger advisors stepped forward, clutching a data tablet that glowed with information about Earth's developing civilization. "It is the humans, Chairman, the species from the third planet in the Sol system. They achieved faster-than-light communication only 3 months ago. By all measurements, they are still in their early stages of development. They possess no advanced weapons technology. Their military forces are outdated by galactic standards. They have no navy capable of defending themselves against any moderately advanced civilization." The council chamber fell silent. The other members exchanged glances, their various forms of expression ranging from confusion to something that might have been amusement. Zoralin, a representative of the ancient Velen species, actually made a sound that resembled laughter. Her forearms gestured dismissively as she spoke. "A newborn species tells us not to approach them. This is audacious. This is either the bravest thing I have heard in centuries or the most foolish." But Vextrel was not amused. His instinct, honed by thousands of years of political maneuvering and diplomatic engagement, told him that something was wrong here. Humans did not simply announce themselves to the galaxy with threats. They did not send messages with such confidence when they possessed so little actual power. Something else was happening, something that the Council did not yet understand. He turned to his advisors. "Send 3 exploration fleets to Earth. I want information about their military capabilities, their technological development, and any weapons systems they might possess. I want to know why a primitive species would dare issue such a warning to the Council, and I want this information within 30 days." The advisors scrambled to follow his orders, and the exploration fleets were dispatched almost immediately. But even as they traveled through space toward the Sol system, even as humanity's massive star system's defense grids came into view, the humans seemed unconcerned. They sent no additional warnings. They offered no negotiations. They simply maintained their statement, repeating their message across all frequencies, as if they knew something that the Galactic Council did not. Back on Earth, in the underground city of New Geneva, where the United Global Government had established its central headquarters, Dr. Sarah Chen sat in a dark room filled with screens and data. She was the youngest representative to ever serve on Earth's Leadership Council, and she carried with her a burden that few humans understood. She had spent the last 6 months learning everything there was to know about galactic civilization, studying the languages and cultures of dozens of alien species, preparing herself for the moment when Earth would finally make its presence known to the greater galaxy. That moment had come faster than anyone had expected. Sarah watched as the response from the Galactic Council scrolled across her screens. The confusion, the dismissal, the barely hidden contempt. She could read between the lines of their transmissions. They saw Earth as a developing resource, a planet full of potential but lacking the strength to be anything more than a target for exploitation. She knew exactly what the Council was thinking, because she had read the same thoughts in the encrypted communications that humanity had intercepted 6 months earlier. The Council was already planning Earth's integration into their system. They would arrive, establish their authority, and begin the process of extracting whatever value they could find. They would take the best minds, the most useful technologies, the most valuable resources. They would leave Earth as nothing more than a colonial outpost, its people reduced to workers and servants. Sarah had shared these intercepted messages with the world leaders, and together they had made a decision that would change everything. They decided not to fight with weapons because they knew they could never win that kind of war. Instead, they decided to fight with something far more powerful: uncertainty. They decided to appear dangerous. They decided to appear unpredictable. They decided to appear like a species that was simply too chaotic to control, too violent to trust, too unstable to risk approaching. And so they sent the warning. Sarah watched as the exploration fleets approached the outer edges of the solar system, their sensors scanning for any sign of advanced weapons technology. What they would find instead would be something far more unsettling, a species that seemed intent on proving just how crazy they could be. The game had begun, and humanity was betting everything on a single strategy. There was no going back now. The Galactic Council had received their warning, and Earth was committed to making sure that the Council believed every single word of it. Outside the chamber, the stars glowed in the darkness of space, indifferent to the events unfolding below. But for the first time in recorded history, a species that should have been easy prey was standing up to the most powerful force in the galaxy and telling them, quite clearly, to stay away. 6 months before the warning was sent, the world had been very different. Humanity had still been hiding, still believing that it could negotiate with the powers of the galaxy from a position of genuine weakness. But that was before the discovery. That was before everything changed. The interception happened almost by accident. A young telecommunications specialist named Marcus had been working late at the Global Communications Center when he noticed something strange in the data streams. There were signals bouncing off the communication satellites, signals that were not meant to be detected. At first, he thought they were just random cosmic noise, the kind of background interference that was common in space. But the more he investigated, the more he realized that these signals were organized, deliberate, and encrypted with algorithms that were far beyond anything humanity had developed. Marcus brought the signals to Dr. Sarah Chen, and together they spent 3 weeks attempting to break the encryption. When they finally succeeded, they discovered a conversation that would seal humanity's fate and force the entire planet to make a choice they had never anticipated making. The transmissions were between members of the Galactic Council, and they were discussing Earth as if it were a problem to be solved rather than a species to be welcomed. The language they used was clinical and cold. One message spoke of Earth's resource potential. Another discussed the most efficient way to extract human genetic material for study. A third outlined the timeline for Earth's peaceful integration into the Council, a process that would involve the arrival of Council representatives within 2 Earth years. But the most disturbing message was the last one, sent by Vextrel himself, the chairman of the Galactic Council. The message was brief but devastating. It said that humanity was to be cataloged as a developing resource, and that the Council had already decided on Earth's status as a colonial outpost. No vote was necessary. No consideration of Earth's autonomy was required. The decision had already been made. Sarah showed these messages to the world leaders, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. Emergency sessions were called. Scientists and military strategists were brought together in secure facilities. For the first time in human history, the planet's leadership had to confront the fact that their civilization was facing extinction. Not by war, not by natural disaster, but by simple absorption into a larger system that viewed them as nothing more than resources to be exploited. General James Morrison, the head of Earth's military forces, was the first to voice the uncomfortable truth. He stood in the Situation Room with a map of Earth's defensive capabilities displayed on the wall behind him. The map looked pathetic compared to what they knew about galactic warfare technology. Humanity had nuclear weapons, advanced missiles, and a small but growing space force. Against the military might of the Galactic Council, all of it was completely useless. "We cannot win a war," he said simply. "Not now, not for 100 years. The gap in technology is too large. The gap in military power is too large. If the Council decides to take Earth by force, there is nothing we can do to stop them." The room was silent for a long moment. Everyone present understood what he was saying. Surrender was not an option, because surrender would still result in the death or enslavement of billions of humans. Fighting was suicide, but doing nothing meant accepting the fate that the Council had already decided for them. It was Sarah who finally spoke. She had been quiet for most of the meeting, but now she stood and walked to the front of the room. When she spoke, her voice was steady and clear, even though her hands were shaking. "There is a third option," she said. "The Council's decision has already been made because they believe we are weak. They believe we are a species that will accept our fate quietly. But what if they were wrong? What if they believed we were something else entirely?" Everyone looked at her, waiting for her to continue. Sarah pulled up her research on human history, on the way humans had survived against impossible odds throughout their existence. She showed them examples of civilizations that had survived through cunning rather than strength, through psychological warfare rather than military might. She spoke of the power of uncertainty, of how fear of the unknown could be more powerful than fear of a known enemy. "We make them afraid," Sarah said. "Not of our weapons because they have better weapons than us. We make them afraid of us. We make them believe that we are unpredictable, that we are chaotic, that we are too unstable to control or colonize. We make them think that approaching Earth would be too dangerous, too risky, not worth the potential gain." A scientist named Dr. Robert Kumar spoke up. "How would we do that? How would we convince a civilization with thousands of years of experience that a primitive species is dangerous?" Sarah smiled, though there was no humor in the expression. "We show them. We show them that humans are willing to break the rules, that we don't think the way they think, that we don't act according to their logic. We convince them that humans are not civilized beings that can be reasoned with or controlled. We convince them that humans are something wild, something unpredictable, something that no advanced civilization would want to risk encountering." Over the following weeks, a plan was developed. It was a plan that required courage, sacrifice, and the complete cooperation of every nation on Earth. It was a plan that would cost lives and resources. It was also the only plan that might actually work. The first step was sending the warning. It had to be unmistakable, unambiguous, and delivered with such confidence that the Council would have no choice but to wonder what gave this primitive species such certainty. The message would be translated into dozens of languages and broadcast across every communication frequency. It would be simple and powerful: do not approach Earth. But the warning was only the beginning. What would follow would be a carefully orchestrated campaign of calculated chaos, false reports, and psychological manipulation, designed to convince the Galactic Council that humanity was simply too dangerous to be worth the risk of approaching. It was a dangerous game, and humanity was betting its entire future on the success of the strategy. Sarah stood in her office as the final preparations were being made. In a matter of days, the warning would be sent. In a matter of weeks, the Council's exploration fleets would arrive. And then the real challenge would begin, making the most advanced civilization in the galaxy believe that a primitive species from a remote planet was something to be feared. She thought about the billions of people who were depending on her, on this plan, on the hope that humanity could survive through intelligence and cunning rather than strength. It was a heavy burden to carry, but as she looked out at the stars beyond her window, Sarah knew that she would do whatever it took to save her species. The 3 exploration fleets arrived at the edge of the Sol system exactly as predicted. They were massive, magnificent ships made of materials that humans did not even have names for. Each fleet contained dozens of vessels, all equipped with sensors and weapon systems that could destroy an entire planet from a distance of millions of kilometers. By any reasonable standard, humanity stood no chance whatsoever. But humanity was not playing by reasonable standards. They were playing a different game entirely. The first sign that something unusual was happening came when the fleets detected military activity in Earth's orbital space. There were ships moving with strange, erratic patterns. Some of them seemed to be performing dangerous maneuvers that made no strategic sense. Some of them appeared to be firing weapons at empty space, as if they were shooting at enemies that could not be seen. The fleet's commanders requested clarification, but the only response they received was a series of cryptic messages that seemed designed to confuse rather than enlighten. One message consisted entirely of philosophical questions about the nature of consciousness and existence. Another was a mathematical theorem that had no bearing whatsoever on military strategy. A third was a poem about the human desire for freedom, written in a style that was simultaneously beautiful and deeply unsettling. The fleet's commanders were puzzled. In their thousands of years of experience dealing with developing civilizations, they had never encountered anything like this. Primitive species either surrendered or fought with some kind of logical strategy. They did not send philosophical questions and poetry. But the messages kept coming. Some of them were threatening in the most confusing way possible. One transmission said, "We have weapons that exist in the space between atoms, and they will leave no trace of your existence except for the memory of your own fear." Another said, "We have calculated the exact moment of your arrival, and we have decided that your death is acceptable to us as a reasonable price for Earth's freedom." None of these things made any sense, and that was exactly the point. Meanwhile, on Earth, massive military drills were taking place. The human forces staged elaborate displays of combat operations that were designed to be visible from space. Soldiers marched in patterns that seemed designed to confuse rather than organize. Weapons were tested in ways that made no tactical sense. At one point, an entire division of soldiers performed a synchronized retreat across a desert plain, moving in chaotic patterns while broadcasting messages that said they were advancing on an enemy position that did not exist. General Morrison had organized these operations with the help of psychologists and strategists from around the world. Every action was designed to convey a single message to the observing alien fleets. Humans are not like other species. Humans are willing to behave in ways that are completely illogical. Humans might do anything. The Second Fleet's commander, an alien being of immense intelligence and experience, began to suspect that something was very wrong. The military drills made no sense. The messages were incoherent. The behavior was unpredictable. This was not the pattern of a civilization preparing for war. This was the pattern of a civilization that might be willing to do anything, regardless of the cost. The commander sent a message back to the Galactic Council. The humans appear to be extremely unstable. Their military operations suggest a willingness to sacrifice vast numbers of their own population for purposes that we cannot identify. Their communications contain threats that seem to reference weapons or tactics that should be impossible for their level of technology. Recommend caution in all further approaches. But the warnings from the Second Fleet were interpreted by some council members as a sign of weakness on the part of the fleet's commander. The Third Fleet's commander, who was more aggressive in nature, decided to move closer to Earth to conduct more detailed scans. It was a decision he would soon regret. As the Third Fleet approached Earth more closely, something extraordinary happened. A small human spacecraft, piloted by a daredevil named Captain Elena Rodriguez, performed a series of maneuvers that seemed to deliberately threaten a collision with one of the alien ships. The human ship flew in circles around the alien vessel, sometimes coming so close that the two ships were separated by only a few hundred meters. The human pilots broadcast a message that said simply, "We are not afraid of you, and we do not care if we die." The alien crew watched in horror as the human pilot performed maneuvers that no rational being would attempt. They could not believe what they were seeing. This human pilot seemed to have no fear of death, no concern for the safety of her ship or crew, no regard for the power of the alien vessel surrounding them. She was behaving like someone who had nothing to lose, like someone who might be willing to fly directly into the alien ship if the opportunity presented itself. The Third Fleet's commander, now genuinely frightened by what he was witnessing, ordered his fleet to withdraw immediately. He sent a report to the council that was full of fear and uncertainty. "The humans are not rational beings," the report said. "They are willing to sacrifice themselves for reasons we do not understand. They possess weapons or tactics that we cannot identify. They seem determined to fight regardless of the outcome. I recommend that all fleets be withdrawn immediately." This report was the turning point. Other fleet commanders began reporting similar experiences. There were mentions of weapons that could not be identified, of military tactics that made no sense, of human soldiers who seemed willing to die in enormous numbers for purposes that were unclear. False reports began to spread through the Galactic Council, each one more dramatic than the last. One report claimed that humans had destroyed an entire patrol squadron with weapons made of pure energy. Another claimed that a single human soldier had disabled 3 alien ships with nothing but determination and rage. None of it was true. There had been no casualties among the alien fleets. There were no weapons made of pure energy. No soldiers had disabled any ships. But the reports spread through the council like wildfire because they told a story that made sense. They explained why this primitive species was so confident in its warning. They explained why humans seemed so willing to risk everything. Sarah watched from her command center as the false reports spread through the council's communication network. She had arranged for some of them to be leaked through certain channels, carefully crafted to seem like real military reports rather than deliberate misinformation. The strategy was working. The council was beginning to believe that Earth was far more dangerous than it actually was. But Sarah also knew that this was only the beginning. The initial phase of the psychological campaign had worked, but maintaining the illusion would require constant effort. The council would eventually send diplomats and scientists to investigate more carefully. They would begin to question the reports. And when they did, humanity would need to be ready with the next phase of the campaign. For now, though, as the 3 exploration fleets began their retreat from the Sol system, Sarah allowed herself a moment of hope. Humanity had survived the first test. The question now was whether they could maintain the illusion long enough to convince the Galactic Council that Earth was simply not worth the risk of approaching. Not everyone on Earth agreed with the strategy. There were those who saw the warning, the military drills, and the deliberate deception as a mistake. There were those who believed that humanity would have been better served by attempting to negotiate with the Galactic Council from a position of honesty rather than from a position of calculated fear. The most serious challenge to the plan came from the human colonies on Mars. The Martian settlements had been established only 30 years earlier, but they had grown into a thriving community of over 10,000 people. They had their own government structure, their own economy, and their own perspective on Earth's relationship with the broader galaxy. Many of the colonists saw the warning as a threat to their own independence. Dr. James Chen, no relation to Sarah, was the leader of the largest Martian colony. He was a man of principle, someone who believed that humanity's greatest strength was its honesty and its willingness to face challenges directly. When he learned of the psychological warfare campaign, he was appalled. He called an emergency session of the Martian Governing Council and announced his decision to establish direct contact with the Galactic Council. "We should not be playing games with our survival," James argued in front of the assembled council members. "We should be honest with the council about our intentions and our capabilities. We should try to negotiate for a place in the galactic community. This campaign on Earth is reckless and foolish. It will lead to nothing but greater misunderstanding." 3 days later, James authorized the transmission of a message directly to the Galactic Council. The message was simple and direct. It apologized for Earth's warning, explained that Earth's leadership was divided, and offered to establish peaceful negotiations with the Council on behalf of the human species. The message was sent with the full weight of the Martian government's authority behind it. When Sarah found out about the transmission, her first reaction was not anger but despair. The plan was already fragile. It depended entirely on the unified front that humanity was presenting to the galaxy. A single crack in that unity could destroy everything they had built. The Galactic Council would see the Martian message and would immediately understand that humans were divided, that some humans were willing to betray others to save their own position. She made the most difficult decision of her life. Sarah contacted General Morrison and told him to move on Mars, not with violence, not with weapons, but with force. The goal was to isolate the Martian colonists and prevent any further communications from reaching the Galactic Council. It was an action that violated humanity's most fundamental principles of individual autonomy and freedom. It was an action that no leader should ever have to authorize, but it was necessary. The general sent a military shuttle to Mars with orders to take control of the communications center and prevent any further transmissions to the Council. The operation went smoothly at first. The military forces secured the facility without any loss of life. But then James Chen and a group of about 200 colonists barricaded themselves inside the colony's inner hub, threatening to depressurize the entire structure if the military forces did not withdraw. Sarah watched the standoff from her command center on Earth. She watched as James spoke through the communications system, explaining his position, declaring his right to contact the Council, arguing that Earth's strategy was wrong and would only lead to greater suffering. She watched as he made a case that was emotionally compelling and logically sound. And then she did something that she would never forgive herself for. She authorized the use of gas to fill the barricaded section of the colony. The gas was not lethal, but it would render everyone in the area unconscious within minutes. It would give the military forces time to move in and secure the space without any need for violence. But something went wrong. One of the colonists had a severe reaction to the gas. His name was Michael Torres, and he was a young man of only 23 years old. He had been born on Mars, had never set foot on Earth, and had his entire life ahead of him. But when the gas filled his compartment, his body reacted in a way that no one had predicted. His heart stopped, and despite the best efforts of the emergency medical team, they could not bring him back to life. Michael Torres became the first human casualty of Earth's campaign against the Galactic Council, but he would not be the last. Sarah stood in her office and stared at the reports coming in from Mars. She read about Michael's life, about his dreams, about the family he had left behind. She read about the other colonists, many of whom blamed her for his death. She read about the anger and resentment spreading through the Martian settlements, and she understood that the cost of Earth's survival was going to be far higher than anyone had anticipated. The colonists were given a choice. They could accept the new communication protocols and remain part of the unified Earth response to the Council, or they could be isolated on Mars indefinitely. The choice was presented as a practical necessity, not as a punishment, but everyone understood what was really happening. The colonists were being forced to choose between their autonomy and their survival. Most of them chose survival. But the incident on Mars had repercussions that spread far beyond the colony. News of Michael's death leaked to human populations around the world. There were protests and demonstrations. There were people who called for Sarah and General Morrison to be arrested for their roles in the boy's death. There were people who called for the entire campaign to be abandoned. Sarah gave a speech on international television. She stood before the world and explained the situation with brutal honesty. She spoke about the Council's intentions, about the reality that humanity faced, about the terrible choices that sometimes had to be made in order to ensure survival. She spoke about Michael Tors, about the tragedy of his death, about the weight of responsibility that she carried for what had happened. "We are facing a choice," Sarah said, looking directly into the camera. "We can choose the comfortable path, the path of honesty and principle, and we can hope that the Council treats us with mercy. Or we can choose the difficult path, the path of sacrifice and strategic thinking, and we can fight for our survival using the only weapons we have, which are our intelligence and our will. Michael Tors died because I made this choice. His blood is on my hands. But if we do not stay united, if we do not continue this campaign, then his death will have been for nothing. Billions of people will die instead of just one, and that is something I cannot accept." The speech changed public opinion significantly. Support for the campaign solidified, though it never returned to the levels it had been before Michael's death. The people of Earth understood what was happening. They understood that they were fighting for their survival, and that this fight would require sacrifice. Sarah appointed a memorial committee to honor Michael Tors and all of the other humans who would die during the campaign. She authorized significant resources to be given to his family and to the Martian colonists who had been traumatized by the incident. And she committed herself to never forgetting the price that humanity was paying for its strategy against the Galactic Council. But the campaign continued. The false reports of human weapons continued to spread through the Council's networks. The military drills became more elaborate and more disturbing. The cryptic messages continued to arrive at the Council's facilities, and with each passing week, the Galactic Council became more convinced that approaching Earth was simply not worth the risk. The question now was whether humanity could maintain this illusion long enough to save itself, and what other sacrifices would be required before the campaign finally succeeded. 1 year after the initial warning was sent, the Galactic Council convened in its main chamber for what would be the most important vote in the Council's history. For 12 months, Earth had maintained its campaign of psychological warfare. For 12 months, false reports of human weapons and impossible human tactics had spread through the galaxy. For 12 months, 3 more exploration fleets had attempted to approach Earth, and 3 more times they had retreated in confusion and fear. The Council chamber was filled with representatives from every major galactic civilization. There were beings made of crystalline structures, beings composed entirely of energy, beings that existed in dimensions that humans could barely comprehend. They had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years, and in all that time, they had never faced a situation quite like this. Vextrel, the ancient chairman, stood before the Council and addressed the gathered representatives. His voice carried the weight of centuries of authority, but even he seemed uncertain about what should come next. "The situation with Earth has become untenable," he said. "We have sent exploration fleets, and they have returned reporting weapons and tactics that should not be possible. We have sent scientists to study the planet, and they have reported encountering hostile forces that they cannot explain. We have intercepted communications, suggesting that the humans are willing to engage in self-destructive behavior if they believe it will protect their world." Vextrel paused and looked around the chamber at the other Council members. "The question before us is simple. What do we do about Earth?" The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some Council members argued that humanity should be approached with greater force, that the reports of advanced weapons were clearly exaggerated or false. Others argued that the risk was simply not worth taking. One representative pointed out that Earth had issued its warning with complete confidence, suggesting that the humans believed they had capabilities that even their own reports did not fully describe. The most telling moment came when one of the oldest Council members, a being named Altaurus who had lived for over 5,000 years, stood to speak. Altaurus had seen countless civilizations rise and fall. He had seen species that were far more advanced than humanity discover that they were not invincible. He had learned through painful experience that some enemies should never be provoked. "I have read the reports from our fleets," Altaurus said, his voice slow and deliberate. "I have read the descriptions of human weapons, of human tactics, of human willingness to sacrifice, and I have come to a conclusion that may seem strange. I believe that the humans are telling us the truth, not because their weapons necessarily function the way they have described, but because they have the will to make them function. Humans are unpredictable. They are willing to take massive risks. They are willing to accept casualties that would be unthinkable to other species. These are not the characteristics of a civilization that can be easily controlled or integrated into our system." Altaurus looked directly at Vextral. "I recommend that we leave Earth alone. I recommend that we declare Earth a quarantine zone, off limits to all council members. I recommend that we treat Earth with the same caution that we would treat any civilization that possesses the capacity to destroy us." The vote that followed was nearly unanimous. The council voted to establish Earth as a quarantine zone, a designation that had only been applied to 3 other planets in galactic history, all of them home to civilizations that were known to possess weapons of mass destruction. No council member would be allowed to approach Earth without explicit permission from the full council. No colony ships would be sent. No resources would be extracted. No humans would be enslaved. But more importantly, the council voted to grant humanity something that they had never offered to any other developing civilization before: observer status. Humanity would be allowed to listen to council broadcasts, to understand how galactic civilization functioned, to prepare itself for eventual full membership in the council, whenever that might be. The observer status was not granted out of respect or recognition. It was granted as a safeguard, a way to monitor Earth and ensure that humanity was not accumulating even more dangerous capabilities. The word spread through the galaxy almost immediately. Humans were not a conquered species. Humans were not to be approached. Humans were something that even the mighty Galactic Council had decided to fear. On Earth, in the command center where she had spent the last year managing humanity's campaign, Sarah Chen received the news with a mixture of relief and dread. The plan had worked. Humanity had survived. But at what cost? Over the course of the year, there had been additional casualties beyond Michael Tor's. There had been military personnel killed in accidents during training drills that were meant to look dangerous. There had been civilian workers injured during the elaborate displays of military power. There had been mental health crises among the population as the stress of the campaign took its psychological toll. The entire human civilization had been transformed by the need to appear dangerous, and that transformation had left deep scars. Sarah took a transport to the surface of Earth and made her way to a viewpoint high in the mountains above New Geneva. She stood there at sunset, looking up at the sky where the stars were just beginning to appear. She thought about Michael Tor's and all the others who had died. She thought about the choices she had made, about the terrible burden of leadership that she now carried. General Morrison joined her on the mountainside. He stood beside her in silence for a long moment before speaking. "We did it," he said simply. "We saved Earth." "Did we?" Sarah asked quietly. "Or did we just trade one kind of threat for another?" She explained what she was thinking to the general. The Galactic Council had declared Earth a quarantine zone, but that quarantine was based on a lie. It was based on false reports of weapons that did not exist, on exaggerated tales of human capabilities that were beyond the truth. Eventually, the Council would learn the truth. Eventually, they would realize that Earth's warning had been a bluff. And when that happened, when the truth came out, the Council might respond with even more force than they would have if Earth had simply surrendered from the beginning. "That is our problem for the future," Sarah said. "For now, we have bought ourselves time. We have bought humanity the chance to actually develop the weapons and the capabilities that the Council believes we already have. We have bought ourselves the chance to make the lie into the truth. She turned to look at the general. If we have any hope of surviving what is coming, we need to use this time wisely. We need to transform humanity into something that the Galactic Council should genuinely fear. We need to develop weapons. We need to strengthen our military. We need to evolve as a species. And most importantly, we need to understand that we can never again return to being a peaceful, pastoral civilization. From this moment on, humanity's entire purpose will be survival and strength. General Morrison nodded. He understood what she was saying. The warning had saved Earth, but the warning had also condemned humanity to an eternal struggle. The days of human peace were over. What would come next would be an age of competition, of growth, of constant preparation for the day when the Galactic Council discovered the truth. Sarah made an official announcement to all the world's leaders. She explained that Earth had been granted observer status in the Galactic Council, and that this was effectively a quarantine that would protect Earth from immediate conquest. But she also made clear that this protection was temporary, that it was based on a strategy that would eventually fail, and that humanity had only one course of action. "We must become what the Council thinks we are," she announced. "We must develop weapons. We must build a military force that can defend our world. We must create a civilization that is actually dangerous, actually unpredictable, actually worth fearing. We have bought ourselves time, but we must use that time wisely. Because the moment the Council learns that we bluffed them, the moment they learn that our weapons do not exist, that will be the moment when the real war begins." As the sun set over the mountains, Sarah stood alone and looked up at the stars. She thought about the future that lay ahead for humanity, about the struggles and sacrifices that would be required. She thought about the billions of people who were now depending on her, on the choices she had made, on the strategy that she had implemented. And she made a silent promise to Michael Tors and all the others who had died. She promised that their deaths would not be in vain. She promised that humanity would use this time to become strong, to become truly dangerous, to transform from a species that was bluffing its way to survival into a species that was genuinely powerful enough to stand among the stars. The warning had saved Earth, but it had also changed humanity forever. What would come next was something new, something unprecedented in galactic history. A species that was willing to do anything to survive, that was willing to sacrifice everything for the chance to become something greater than what they had been. And the Galactic Council, watching from their distant stations and monitoring transmissions from the quarantined world, would have no idea that the real transformation had only just begun.